Okay, so I just want to talk briefly about image considerations. And since we haven't yet gotten into Photoshop, some of you, of course, may have some experience with it, but there are obviously certain techniques that we use with Photoshop, professional correct techniques that we haven't covered yet. And there may be some things that you're wanting to do in your first project in this newsletter that you simply may not yet be able to do, or you are able to do with some basic experience in Photoshop and you would just be doing in a different way. Or some of you may be really good with Photoshop already and already know how to do these things. Either way, prior to some of our Photoshop tutorials where we get into more complicated aspects of it and best practices, we'll say, I want to give you just some things to consider when you're working with the imagery for your newsletter. So the Bell imagery that you can get for the Bell Let's Talk initiative, there is some very high resolution images out there. It's available through their online media kit, I believe. And a lot of that imagery has the white background like this. So what this is called is a close crop image, meaning it's just the figure or the item and it's on a plain white background. So several of their images are like that, obviously in keeping with their branding, but it also allows some ease of use. This one is a little, it's not quite 100% white, and the reason I know that is because as I hover over it in Photoshop, I'm just looking at my info palette over here, and I can see that it's giving me some hits of color in the CMYK values, where these should be 0. So these were fine, and then this one has a little bit of gray. And then there's this one that is the personalities associated with Bell Let's Talk, and it has, for the most part, it's all 0 except when we get down into their shadows. So when you put an image like this into your layout, when you place it in, obviously you're going to have this big white background. And we haven't gone through what is it's a challenging tutorial, I'll put it that way, but it's not horrible. But we haven't gone through working with the pen tool in Photoshop, and that is this tool right here. And the pen tool, if you can learn the pen tool in Photoshop, you've already learned it in InDesign and Illustrator. If you learn it in either of those, you've already learned it in Photoshop. The thing is, it has different functions in different programs. One of the things that it's mainly used for in Photoshop is close cropping. So it would be clipping out and removing someone from a background. We're going to get into that in a later project. However, when you're working on your newsletters, if you wanted to bring in images that have a white background like this, and you're unable to do that close cropping correctly, we do have some options. So the first thing, I just want to go back to this. The easiest way to use images is to, of course, place an image in, and that image fills the frame. There's no white background. There's nothing that you would otherwise want to remove from the background. Or you can bring an image in, and now the Bell media, the Bell brand makes this quite easy. You can bring an image in, and I'm just going to get these out of the way for us and place an image in. You can bring an image in onto that white background, and obviously that's not going to affect anything. I'm going to try and save an image out here so that we have a good one to work with. So let's say I wanted to bring this in. So file, place, and place in that image. So we bring it in, Command Shift, click and drag, scale it down, and there on a white background, it works fine. So if you are working with something like that, we can even bleed that off. There we go. So if you're working with something like that on a white background, that's fine. You want to make sure it's sent to the back and so on. It's all dependent on your layout, of course. However, once you put something like that onto any background, if you're trying to put it on a background like this, like a gray, we have that the white of the background is a solid that's going to kind of make a mess of your layout. So you can see that that white is there. So working with it on a white background, we can do that. And even if you have some Photoshop experience where you use what we call the magic wand, which it's called magic wand, but it's not very magical because it often causes more problems than it solves. But you can select the background and remove it and so on. That's a pain, and it ends up being quite poor quality, especially when it selects areas that you don't want it to select, like here on the bike. So first thing, like I said, choosing images that just fill a frame, that's fine. Choosing images that you can put directly on white, in this case, in this brand, that's helpful. It's not helpful in all brands, of course. And then I'm going to show you in another InDesign file what you can do. I may come back to this file as well. What you can do in order to get rid of that white background and still have some nice effects going on. So I've got this one here. Now this image is the image of all the celebrities there, and it's this one. Now it has a white background, and if I were to place it into my InDesign file with that white background, it would obviously not sit well on this gray box. So I removed the white background, and it did it quite nicely. It did it very, you can see this is pixelated, but it's pretty clean. But you may be able to see very slightly the gray box going through there. So to some extent we can get away with that, but we have some tricks that allows us to do this. So what I did, I'm going to place this in again. All I have here is a gray box, and I'm going to place that image in. So I'll just get it saved here. So I'll go File, Place, and bring that in. So there's the white, there's the white background. Now I can't see my gray box through it, so I'm going to select the image, and this is quite a low resolution image. Of course, I can increase my display performance, that'll help. There we go. I've selected the image. I'm going to go to the Object menu and Effects and choose Transparency. So Object, Effects, Transparency. And in the mode, so this is it's referred to as the blending mode, I'm going to choose multiply. And what that does is remove all of the light from the image. So it's based on white being behind it that's going to allow this to work. And a light color here, but you'll see what happens when we choose multiply. I'm going to turn on preview here and go multiply. So what it's doing is removing the white, which is it's removing the light from the image. And I'll say, okay, now that's why we see the line a bit there. So you can get away with it in certain applications. You know, for the most part, looking at this a quick glance, the line may be seen a bit, but when I do that, for example in this, I would do it and land that line, this line here, at the knees. And the reason I land it at or near the knees, as close as I can, is because the line kind of gets optically hidden by what our eyes are picking up as a joint or a section of the figure. So we could do the same thing at the waist. For the most part, we should be able to do it. And you see it a little bit on his hand, but again, our eyes are kind of deceived by the sectioning that the waist creates, and we can get away with that line being there. Now, obviously, if we put it somewhere, you know, up around here, that's going to look awkward. We're certainly going to see it in the lighter parts of the image. So that's a quick workaround that allows you to, for now, use an image using the multiply. So that again was in the object menu, effects, and transparency, and I changed the blending mode to multiply. So if we bring the image in over here, this image, for example, I can put the multiply on that as well. And you can do a little bit, I'm just going to move this to the front, a little bit of overlap, remembering how effective overlap is. But again, you've got a little bit of line. So it all depends on how light that object of overlap is. Now the other thing, we do have another option we can do, because you know something like this could work quite well for this sort of layout where you have a little bit of overlap there over the rule, you have a little bit of overlap on this panel. So this is where if you're really desperate, what you can do is take I just use usually a circle or whichever shape will match the area. And I'm going to make a white circle here. And I'll send it backward so it's just behind the image. So I just did Command and my left square bracket there to send it back, but you can just do arrange if you like. And I'm going to apply go back to effects, I'm going to apply a blur or a glow to that. So I'm going to try the outer glow. What that'll do is hopefully eliminate. Now this is when you're really you're a little desperate, but you're trying to eliminate the fine lines. So I'm going to increase this glow a fair bit. This is a tough one, but we'll see if we can get it to work. And sometimes you can place that in a way that will eliminate seeing the line through the object. You have to be very careful because you're trying to place that glow. So I can actually squeeze this up a bit because I'm just trying to get the helmet. and then you get other things. So you can see, like, I got to be very careful where I place it. I have to move this to the front and so on. But little techniques like that, you can sometimes hide the line. Obviously, Photoshop is the better choice. Instead of going through all this, you know, figuring out how to properly remove the background and so on. But we're not there yet. We will be there soon. However, I know that with this project, specifically with the Bell Media images, you have that white background and it can cause some challenges, but just let me know if you have any questions in that regard or want me to check something, and I might be able to give you some guidance on it. But you'll find in our next project, we'll actually have we're going to be getting into Photoshop, and then you'll have some even better solutions for that. But mainly using that multiply and using a light background like that. Even on this, what I could do here is apply a gradient. And what we're always trying to achieve is dimension in a layout. These images are great. Bell's images are very useful. So if I just put a gradient on this, and I'll lighten that up in a moment, but just doing something like that gradient going from a light color, so I'm just going to put a little bit of a tint on this first. Actually, I have to get my tint as a swatch, so I'm going to go right down to 10, and then I'll save that as a swatch. So now I can apply my gradient and bring that in, replace the full black. So I did that quickly, but what I've done is created, instead of a solid box, I created the gradient of light gray to white. And that means there's no fine line when we're on a white background, but it lets us bring in that dimension a bit. So their shadows are still there. The image has a multiply applied to it, but we no longer get that fine line going through. So you do have some options aside from going into Photoshop and doing a really precise clipping. However, I will show you that, again, the tool that we will be learning, if for any reason you're interested in moving ahead with it, is the pen tool. And it is a tool that the way we use it is to create a path. Now I'm being very inaccurate here for a moment. We create a path to go around the object. Eventually we go all the way around the object, and then once you've gone, I'm obviously just doing this quickly. Once you've gone all the way around, you would use that to create a selection and then eliminate the background. You could copy the shape that you traced out, or you can invert the selection and get rid of the background and so on. We'll get to that, but you can see for now that's a little complicated. So you have some options with your imagery. If there's something you want to try, just let me know and I can definitely help you out. But fortunately, the Bell images, the Bell brand is mostly on a white background anyway, so that helps these work for you. And then if you are doing the climate network, for the most part, just try to stick with images that fill the frame anyway, and you should be okay. So when we get into Photoshop, we'll do a tutorial based on the pen tool. And like I said, it's in all of the Adobe programs. In Illustrator, it's used to draw, obviously. In InDesign, it's used to draw, but it's more so used to modify. So you might modify a type frame using the pen tool, or an image frame and so on. And then in Photoshop, it's very much used for very accurate selections over the tools that are automated or quick tools, because they're actually not that great. They're not that accurate in the end. Okay, so hopefully that helps you out with your image selection and your image use. But I know in this case it's a little complicated when we haven't really dived into Photoshop that much yet.